The auction hall was filled with an energy that crackled in the air. Hundreds of alien species gathered from across the galaxy, their faces eager, calculating, and cold. The auctioneer stood at the front, his voice amplified through the speakers as he gestured toward a large screen behind him. Next up, a rare prize. A woman of great skill and strength, once of royalty, now available for sale. Liara, princess of the Zalorian people, sold into servitude after a betrayal by her people. Captain Evan Carter watched the screen with a frown. He'd heard rumors about the princess, about the way she had been betrayed by her own government, but he never expected to see her here, at an auction, ready to be sold to the highest bidder. Liara was tall, with long, dark hair that shimmered like midnight, and eyes that glowed with the intensity of a distant star. Her features were sharp, regal, even in the confines of her prison-like cage. She stood with her back straight, defiant, as if she refused to acknowledge her situation, though her clenched fists betrayed the fear and anger within her. Evan wasn't the type to get involved in such affairs. He had his own life, his own crew, and his own mission. He was a human trader, skilled at navigating the complicated politics of the galaxy. But this was different. The auctioneer's voice echoed again, offering her at a starting bid far beyond what he usually dealt with. Yet, something tugged at Evan's conscience. He had no intention of buying a slave, but this was no ordinary slave. She was a princess, and her presence here felt wrong, like something the universe itself had twisted out of shape. A sense of duty gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore it. His hand reached for the control panel beside him, and before he realized it, he'd placed the first bid. The room fell silent for a moment. Liara's eyes shifted toward him, and for the briefest second, their gazes locked. He wasn't sure if it was a look of disdain or something else entirely, but she quickly looked away. "Do I hear a higher bid?" the auctioneer called out, sensing the sudden interest in the air. Another bid followed, this time from a tall alien with pale green skin and black eyes. His fingers hovered over the controls as the tension in the room increased. Evan didn't blink. His decision had been made. He had come here with a clear mission, but this wasn't something he could ignore. He placed another bid, higher than the first, and watched as the green-skinned alien hesitated. The bids climbed, but each time Evan was quicker, his hand moving before the others could react. The alien stared at him, eyes narrowing with hostility, but Evan didn't care. He had something to prove now, not to the crowd, but to himself. After several tense moments, the green-skinned alien finally withdrew with a growl. The auctioneer's voice was triumphant. "Sold." To the human bidder in the corner. "The princess is yours." A murmur spread through the crowd as Evan stood from his seat, the weight of the transaction settling in. He wasn't sure what he had just done, but there was no turning back. As the rest of the auction continued, he made his way to the front, where Lyra was being led down from the stage. The guards who escorted her looked at him with suspicion, but they didn't challenge him. Liara stood before him, silent, her gaze cold and unwavering. Her eyes were darker now, perhaps in disappointment, or perhaps in anger. It didn't matter. The deal was done. Evan led Liara to his ship, the Starlight's Edge, a sleek vessel with a reputation for swift travel across the galaxy. The crew, a small group of humans and aliens, looked on curiously as their captain walked through the docking bay, the princess in tow. Lara was silent, walking with a proud, almost defiant posture, her chin held high despite the chains that now bound her wrists. Evan wasn't sure what to say. He had bought her for reasons that were unclear even to him. The situation felt wrong, yet the decision had been made. He had no idea how to deal with her, how to earn her trust, or even how to convince her that he was not like the others who had wronged her. But one thing was certain. This was far from over. As they reached the ship's interior, Liara glanced around, her eyes scanning every detail of the vessel. She seemed more curious than afraid. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar environment, or perhaps it was because she knew she was now in the hands of someone who, while not cruel, was still a stranger to her. Evan gestured toward a small cabin, offering her a space to rest. "You'll stay here until we can figure things out," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I don't expect anything from you, not yet." "I just want to make sure you're safe." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Safe? Is that what you think this is about?" she asked, her voice cold and full of disdain. "You've bought me. My safety doesn't matter to you. You have what you wanted. The rest is just a formality." Evan hesitated. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said carefully. "I bought you to help you. He paused, unsure of how to continue. "I'm not like the others. I can't undo what's happened to you, but I can give you a chance to be free." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him or not. Then she turned away, walking toward the small bed in the corner. "Free?" she repeated, her voice bitter. "You may have bought me, but don't think for a moment that I'll forget that. Not ever." Evan nodded slowly, understanding her anger. He hadn't expected gratitude, but he also hadn't expected the weight of her resentment to hit him so hard. "You don't have to like me," he said softly, "but I'll do what I can to make things right. I just need your trust." Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she sat on the bed, her back to him, her body tense, as if she were preparing for something. Evan turned to leave, but before he could, she spoke again. "Don't pretend like you understand," she said. "You can't. You don't know what it's like to be betrayed by your own people, to be used like an object. You think you're helping me, but all you've done is trap me in another cage." Her words stung, and Evan could feel the weight of her pain in each syllable. But there was something in her voice, something fragile beneath the anger, that told him she wasn't as strong as she appeared. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, before stepping out of the room and closing the door behind him. In the days that followed, Evan did his best to give Liara space, though he still checked in on her periodically. He didn't know what to say to bridge the growing distance between them. He tried to treat her with respect, as if she were a guest, not a prisoner, but he was constantly reminded of the chains that bound her, both physically and emotionally. Liara didn't speak much during the first few days. She would eat when food was offered, but never with any enthusiasm. She would sleep for hours, but wake up in the dead of night, staring out the small window of her cabin, her thoughts clearly far away. One evening, as the starlight's edge cruised through a quiet stretch of space, Evan found himself standing by the observation window, lost in thought. He was watching the stars, thinking about the mission he had left behind, the one that had brought him to this point, and about Lyra. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to her, what had made him act so impulsively at the auction. Was it her eyes? Her strength? The way she had held herself despite the humiliation? Or was it something more? Something deeper? The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. He turned to see Liara standing in the doorway of the observation room. She hadn't said a word, but her presence was enough. Evan felt his heart race for a moment, unsure of what she would say or do. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "about what you said, about trust." Evan met her gaze. "And?"
"I don't trust you,"
she replied, her eyes unwavering. "Not yet. But maybe, in time, I could. Maybe." Her words were a reluctant admission, but they felt like a breakthrough to Evan. It wasn't much, but it was something. They both knew it would take time, but for the first time since he had purchased her, Evan felt a glimmer of hope. He smiled faintly. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "Time." Liara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded once, before turning and leaving the room. Evan watched her go, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He didn't know how long it would take or how hard it would be, but he was willing to wait. This wasn't just about the purchase anymore. It was about something far deeper. something that neither of them could have predicted, got both of them hesitant to make the first move, yet neither fully able to ignore the unspoken tension that hung between them. There were moments when their conversations were brief, polite, even kind. But those moments were often followed by silence that felt thick with unspoken words. Liara remained distant, yet there was something different about her. She wasn't as cold as when he had first met her. Every now and then, Evan caught her glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes filled with thoughts that she never voiced. He didn't push her for answers. He had learned by now that rushing would only push her away. The ship was peaceful in the quiet stretches of space they traveled through, and Evan did his best to focus on his work. His crew had adapted to Liara's presence, though they too were careful in their interactions. No one knew how to treat her. She was both a princess and a prisoner, a captive who demanded respect, but it was also caught in a web of complicated emotions. Evan found himself growing increasingly concerned for her. He couldn't explain it, but her pain seemed to seep into him. Every time he saw her standing in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars, there was a sadness in her that he couldn't ignore. He wanted to understand her better, to know what haunted her, but he also knew that forcing her to talk about it would be a mistake. Then came the night that changed everything. Evan had just finished a meeting with his crew when he heard a commotion outside the ship's medbay. At first he thought it was nothing more than a small accident, perhaps a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But when he stepped into the hallway, he found one of his crew members, a young woman named Zara, holding Liara steady as she swayed dangerously on her feet. "Captain!" Zara called out, her face pale. "Liara, she's hurt!" Evan rushed over, his heart pounding. Lyra's usual regal posture was gone. She was slumped against Zara, her breath shallow, her face twisted in pain. "What happened?" Evan demanded, his voice low with urgency. "I don't know," Zara said, looking frightened. "She was in the medical bay when I found her. She started to collapse just as I got there. I think she's been overexerting herself." Evan felt a pang of guilt. He had known she was pushing herself too hard, but he hadn't realized how much it had affected her. "Take her to her room," he ordered, his voice sharp. "I'll get the med kit." Zara nodded and carefully helped Liara down the hall to her quarters, but Liara barely seemed to notice the movement. Her eyes fluttered closed, and she appeared to be struggling to stay awake. Evan hurried to the medbay and grabbed the medical supplies he thought might help, his mind racing. He had to get to her, had to make sure she was all right. When he reached her cabin, he found Liara lying on the bed, her body limp, her breathing still shallow. Zara stood by the door, her face filled with worry. "I don't know what to do," Zara said softly. "She's not talking, Captain, and she's burning up." Evan knelt beside the bed, his hands trembling as he touched Liara's forehead. The heat that radiated from her skin was alarming. He quickly set the medical supplies down and began to check her pulse. It was rapid, erratic. Something wasn't right. "I think we need to get her to a medical facility," he said, his voice low and filled with concern. But before he could move to lift her, Liara's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," she gasped, her eyes flickering open. "Please, don't take me to the medbay." Evan froze, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with exhaustion, but there was also a quiet plea in them.
"I just need rest," she whispered, her grip loosening.
"Please," Evan hesitated. He wanted to argue, to insist on getting her professional help, but he could see the raw fear in her eyes. She was a princess, used to being pampered, but now she was nothing more than a captive, weak and vulnerable. She had trusted him enough to ask him not to send her away. He slowly nodded. "Okay, Lara, but you have to promise me that you'll rest. Let me help you." She didn't reply right away, but her eyes softened, just slightly. "I promise," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Evan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite the panic that threatened to rise in his chest. He moved to her side, carefully lifting her up to sit against the pillows. He adjusted the blankets around her, making sure she was comfortable. Then he reached for the med kit, administering a